Hello, everyone. Welcome to the workshop. Happy to see you all here. Today, we're joined by about 35 people. We'll see if everyone makes it. Sometimes people stay and they watch the recording later. But thank you for spending time with us here today. We have an exciting workshop all about fingerstyle guitar today. This is going to be led by our Arpeggiato teacher and my friend Brayden. By the way, if you like the style of his teaching style, I'm happy to say that he is available for weekly private lessons. So you can take lessons right here on Zoom with him. Just check out his profile on our website. I threw the link in the chat there if you're interested. Also, so if this is your first workshop with us, the way it's going to work is very simple. There's going to be 1 hour where Brayden is going to talk. He has a handout, two handouts actually. I threw them in the chat in case you didn't download them. They're there or they're in your email. Please do follow along with those. So for about an hour, he's going to give a workshop, and then there'll be a 30-minute Q&A in which you can ask him or I a question. So while we're doing the class, do be thinking about questions that might arise. If he says something interesting about technique that piques your interest, something interesting about nails, finger picking pattern, anything, maybe save it and then we'll talk about it at the end. To ask a question, you can physically raise your hand and I'll call on you, or you can use the raise hand feature. If you do not want to read your question out loud, then you can write it in the chat and I will read it out loud for you. Okay, please do keep your microphones muted for the duration of the workshop unless you are asking a question. I do highly recommend that everybody who can have their camera on. Being that this is virtual, it's nice for Brayden to talk to faces and see you all like we're all sitting in a room, and that's really, we can capture that with the cameras on. Thank you all I see some more cameras turning on. Thank you. And it's just easier for him to gauge everyone's reaction. But this class is being recorded, and if you do not want to be on a recording, then you may turn your camera off if you're uncomfortable with that. Okay, without further ado, let's throw it over to Brayden for a fun fingerstyle workshop. Brayden.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Brandon, for that introduction. And I am looking forward to working with everybody on some fingerstyle guitar today. The first thing that comes to my mind when I hear someone say fingerstyle guitar is what is that and what does that exactly entail? And depending on who you ask, it's going to have several different answers. But essentially, fingerstyle guitar should be using the fingers, right? So, classical guitar is technically a form of fingerstyle guitar. And I took a little while to think what's the delineation between the two major different styles of fingerstyle? Well, one is more harmonic based. Some of you might be familiar with Travis picking, where you take chord shapes and you add some form of arpeggio pattern to it, which is great. And if that's something that really interests you, there are countless sources for it, including the complete Giuliani studies, which are fantastic for those who wish to really get into arpeggios and the different patterns we can do with our right hand. What I want to focus on today is playing music in two voices. Playing music in two voices allows the guitarist, or any instrument really, to stand on its own. You don't need a singer, you don't need another instrumentalist. You can play everything that is necessary to render a convincing version of a song. So my goal today for everybody here is to try and synthesize both the mechanics involved, a little bit of the theory, and then incorporate the musicality, maybe even a bit of improvisation or making our own arrangements towards the end. So I do have two handouts, and my goal with these handouts isn't to sit there and share my screen and make everyone go through them each one step at a time rather tediously. But if you want to follow along at the same time, it's there for your reference, and it's there for the future. The first thing I want to point out then, as we get into starting to play, and I hope everyone has their guitars because we're going to be playing a lot today, is figuring out some of the mechanics. There are our guitars. Thomas Mace was a great writer. He has this wonderful treatise from 1676. It's quite funny in some ways. He waxes verbose And there's this cool lute in there that's called the diphone. It's pretty wicked cool. What he says in here, though, that really caught my interest, and I'm going to pose a question to everybody first that I want you to think about during the course of this that I will touch back on at the end, and that is, how would more strings make this style of two-voice playing easier? Because Thomas Mace said that having more strings was actually easier than having fewer strings. Interesting proposition to start with. The next thing that he brought up that I like to incorporate is this idea that the right hand needs to be trained, and it needs to be trained primarily starting from the thumb, because the right hand has far fewer options than the left hand. The left hand has far more options, and it's usually our expressive hand. This is where we add vibrato and we add some other things. This hand needs to be programmed in a way that we can really rely on it at all times. So the first thing that he did is make an analogy, and he said if we made a rudimentary harp or a crude harp by tying some strings onto a table, maybe 7 of them, you could master that relatively quickly. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to completely ignore the left hand for a second and look at some of the basic mechanics of the right hand. My goal with the first few pages of this exercise is to feel confident in bringing your fingers all the way across the strings and bringing your thumb all the way across the strings. So if you want to follow along in the handout, we're going to start by working our way across the strings with our fingers. Now, this is a historical approach to fingering, starting with the middle finger and thumb always together on strong beats. The middle finger has more pad or flesh on it, and it's a stronger finger. So historically speaking, they actually preferred to use the middle finger on those strong beats. And just to get us going here, can you try adding very rudimentary, but thumb and middle on all the strings, keeping the thumb outside of the hand so it never interferes with the fingers. We can try it again together. Here's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. I know it feels very rudimentary, and it is, but one of the things that I noticed when I first started doing exercises like this is how difficult it is to play adjacent strings, especially to get good tone and have good control. So the next exercise has 2 articulations of the top voice for every articulation of the bass voice. So we're going to go M, I, M, I, M, I, M, I, M, I, all the way across. We can maybe try that together here. I'll give you a really slow 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. M, I, M, I, M, I, M, I, M, I. Very good. And then the next one is to have 4 articulations on the top voice, with the bottom voice just keeping that steady half-note pulse. And here I want to make just a quick comment on time. Time is relative, as Einstein said, so this needs to be something that is sustainable for each person. Someone might be able to do this very quickly, and good for them. If you can, all the best to you. If you need to go a little slower, please do. It's something that I would rather it sound good, and with such rudimentary exercises, this is a chance to work on touch and feel and the way it sounds, and to work on the tone that you produce in your right hand. We're going to flip this exercise on its head now, and we're going to start by adding a very easy 2-finger tremolo on the high E string. And then we're going to bring our thumb all the way up to the B string and back down. And then change the subdivisions. Can you articulate while continuing alternating M and I, adding a bass note on every single pluck? way up, all the way down. Great. And then the funnest one, can you put 2 thumb plucks for every single top string? All the way up, all the way down. This is going to be the fundamental way that our right hand functions when playing in 2 voices. Regardless of what the left hand's doing, we need to feel confident in any of these combinations, having either the faster subdivisions on the top voice or the faster subdivisions in the bass voice. This is all starting just in the right hand, of course. And in the left hand, we're going to get there now. This is when it might be convenient to turn to the theory supplement, and I will share my screen in this situation. A lot of people think scales and all of this, what does this mean? Well, scales, when it comes to diatonic tonal music, is going to be the vocabulary that we use. And having an understanding of that is absolutely imperative to bridge the gap between the mechanical, which we just did, and the musical, which we want to be able to do. There are formulas for these, which are quite handy. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step for the major scale. It can also be very convenient to think of them in terms of scale degree numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And back down, you'll notice that the 5 is called the dominant. This is where I have a lot of fun with music. To me, music is a journey of home, away from home, and typically back home again. We can go somewhere else too, I guess. But that being said, what's the furthest we can go from home? Technically speaking, it would be in the middle of the subdominant and the dominant, or the 4th and 5th scale degree. That would have been called the tritone, or the devil in music, for a lot of history. Very dissonant, and you might recognize it from The Simpsons and a whole bunch of other things. But for many centuries, they avoided that almost at all costs. There is a hierarchy here in music, and this was something that Pythagoras had discovered by listening to anvils of different sizes being hit, and he realized that having a ratio of exactly half of a proportion would give you something that produced harmony. In this case, I'm going to simplify it and say, let's just make sure we know where our tonic and our dominants are. The best news about this is we have 5 fingers, so we can always figure out what the 5th is of any key by just going, oh, C, D, E, F, G. Oh, the 5th of C is G. What's the 5th of D? D, E, F, G, A. Oh, it's 5 away. We have 5 fingers. It's a really fast, short way of finding out what our tonic and our dominant are. And those are going to be the 2 most important pitches and chords in any key. And the minor formula is going to be rather similar, just starting on a different tonic if it's a relative key. Relative keys share the exact same pitches, but start on a different tonic or a different tonal center. So you'll notice it's still A, B, C, D, E, F, G with no sharps and flats, but starting on A as opposed to starting on C. For anyone looking for some more theory help, I'm going to recommend musictheory.net. It's a free and invaluable resource, and there are so many great tools on here, from lessons where you can learn about all of these different things, to exercises where you can go in and set up some fretboard note identifications or scales, to the tools here that provide us with some scale calculators. So if you're wondering what is a D major scale, here it is. And if you follow the formula, you'd see why the sharps and flats are there. Without spending too much time on that though, I want to get to the playing. We're going to incorporate some of this by playing some of these scales just on an open string. So if you refer to the handout now, I can share my screen for this one. We're going to look at the E major and the E minor scale together on a single string. Thinking about some of the mechanical elements that we were just working on the high E string, can we start with middle finger and give that basic tremolo? And then for each pitch, we're going to add 4 articulations as we head up the scale. So I'm going to start it one more time. We're going to go rather slow. And don't worry about the bass line yet. I want to think mostly about that top voice. What is it doing? Where are our half steps and where are our whole steps? This is a struggle that we face in the guitar because everything is a half step. So we have to think about it a little bit more than perhaps a piano that has half steps and whole steps a little clearer with white and black keys. So if we start on our open E, join me with this really easy tremolo. We're going to go 1, 2, ready, and E up a whole step, to F sharp, a whole step to G sharp, half step to A. Then we'll shift a whole step to B, whole step to C sharp, whole step to D sharp, half step E. Why I used this fingering for the left hand is just for the least amount of shifts. There are all sorts of combinations though, and we'll look at that in a second. The next step would be, okay, can we turn this into two-part harmony by adding maybe just a simple bass line, and you can choose maybe to pluck it every 4. Now, as a quick quiz, what would the 5 of the key of E be? If I pulled out my nifty 5 fingers here, we have E, F, G, A, B. The note B, it's going to be something special, and you'll notice that's where we do our shift, is on that 5th. You can add different subdivisions to this. It's a great way to improvise as well. You can make up simply adding a pedal on that low bass and allowing you to play around with where your half steps and whole steps really lie on the instrument. Let's try the E minor scale. This one only has 1 sharp on it, which is really nice because we can think about it in a different way. The same shift's going to apply in the same place. It's a matter of figuring out these combinations of where the half steps and whole steps lie between our fingers. The biggest one you'll probably see is that there are occasional spots where there are 3 whole steps in a row, and that's when you have to figure out how you're going to navigate that stretch. But most of the time we'll either have a half step first and a whole step second, or vice versa. Let's try the E minor together. I'm going to go rather slow. We're going to start on that same tremolo. You can join me anytime. And here's 1, 2, ready, and E, F sharp, G natural, A, shift, B, C natural, D, and E. What's nice about some of these things is you'll recognize it from classical guitar literature. Here's a famous piece, the Romanza, and it starts on, oh, what do you know, the dominant, the B. Same basic technique, playing a melody on the top string. What we need to be able to do, though, is navigate, obviously, up and down strings, but across strings as well. So this is where I'm going to move into the next part. We're going to spend a lot of time in the key of A minor today, because there's no sharps and there's no flats. One of the best parts about the genius of Bach is that Bach used something that I've heard scholars refer to as implied harmony, where the solo unaccompanied pieces for cello and violin are so effective because he's able to imply the harmony that he wants without necessarily playing full chords. And this is the beautiful thing about two-voice arranging and two-voice playing, is that you can apply almost everything that you need to have a full rendition of a piece with only 2 voices. We're going to work on that journey of home and away from home and back to home again. And in the key of A minor, our home will be A. We're going to go up to the dominant, or the 5, which would be, let's see, A, B, C, D, oh, E. A, B, C, D, E. Good. And then thinking about the harmony involved, it would be an A minor chord as our 1, and the E major chord as our dominant 5. To give it that dominant quality, the 5th scale degree has to be major, which is why we have a G sharp there. But we're not going to worry about the G sharp so much this time because we're going to stick in the natural minor for our exercises. That's going to be our first exercise, where we move from the tonic to the dominant and back again. Home, away from home, and back to home. So I'm playing octaves when I move the bass line. I have A and A and E and E. So the next step would be thinking about some of that mechanical work that we did at the beginning. How do we add different subdivisions to the different voices? Okay. What if we added 2 plucks on the top voice and left the bass voice as it is? What if we added 3 or triplets? 16th notes, 4 plucks. Great. So this really works out the top voice. What if we did the same thing on the bottom voices? Let's isolate that 5-note scale using only our thumb. A, B, C, D, E, E, D, C, B, A. Very nicely done. Let's add that simple tremolo back on the top string. And then and what if we said 4 articulations of the top voice for every bass note that changes? So you're mixing some of the mechanical and the musical and the theoretical by moving from our dominant to our tonic and back again. This opens the door to do some basic improvisation. In fact, it was with one of my favorite lute players, Hopkinson Smith, that I saw this happen in concert. Rather than going on stage or getting ready to perform your piece and immediately going into it, and then discovering your guitar's out of tune, or then discovering that you're not warmed up, I saw him sit between pieces and while he tuned, improvise little preludes. And I thought, what a great way to do that. You can say something as simple as, I'm going to go from home and away from home and back to home in the key of the piece I'm going to play. Using the vocabulary of that key. Really simple, and you go, huh, okay, that's really nice. What if I added another scale degree? Well, let's start with the subdominant. So we have a 1, 4, 5. In the key of A, that would be a D. So maybe our chord progression could be 1, A minor, 4, D minor, 5, E, and 1, A minor. So we just have a 1, 4, 5, 1. There's a lot of ways we could approach this. We could add more chords, but since we're sticking with 2-voice counterpoint at the moment, let's stay with that. We can start with the bass line. Very simple, effective. You're playing around in the scale. If you're having an issue thinking, how do I come up with something that sounds nice? Well, you can repeat things, build expectations, and then break it, or do what is called a sequence. You can take a pattern and you can continue doing it. So maybe you start on the root of the chord, A, B, C, and then on the next chord tone, you do the same thing. You go up 3 notes, but you start on the next note of the scale. Great. And then in that handout, you'll notice that there are some other, let me pull it up myself, ways of articulating this with different subdivisions, adding more voices. That's also quite fun. You'll notice maybe towards the bottom of the page here, let me share it, that when we put the melody in the bass line, that frees up the top strings to be able to add extra voices. And from there, there's a never-ending mix of things that we can do, including those Giuliani studies. This is in 3 voices. We have the top voices that you hear as a pair, and the bottom voice that moves around. From here, we can also expand the range. We've stuck pretty much within our 1 to 5 and back down to 1. So in this case, I went below the 1, down to the 5. A, G, F, E, 1, 7, 6, 5. And back up. And in this situation, we're going to harmonize the entire A minor scale. So if you played just the top voice, there's one little left hand hint I want to give here when working in 2-part voices, and that is that we have to use our 4th finger a lot more than we're used to, because we need to really free up the 3rd finger to play bass lines. So as you're playing this scale, I'm going to encourage the note D and the note G and even A to be the 4th finger, just to start training it. In this situation, since we're playing open basses, it's not such a big deal, but later on when we change keys, you're going to see that you have to hold bass notes, and your 3rd finger becomes very occupied. So we have to work on that 4th finger gaining that independence and strength. Very good. So looking at changing keys, this is where it's going to become more beneficial in a lot of ways. And this is something that you can practice in the right hand. It's never going to really change down here. That's why the mechanical is so important. We're going to work on making this hand reliable, consistent, and to the point where you have the confidence that the thumb will navigate all 6 strings and the fingers can navigate all 6 strings. The left hand is going to have a bit more of that theory and expressive side to it, where we have to keep track of what our 1 and our 4 and our 5 might be and what the pitches are. So I want to try a bit of a C major scale together. If we start on the 2nd string, note C, what's the dominant or the 5 in the key of C? Well, it'd be, let's see, C, D, E, F, oh yeah, G. So we have C, D, E, F, G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this is that opportunity to really practice that 4th finger coming in. Different subdivisions. And if we separate the voices, we're going to end up having the bass, which will go between C and the dominant G. You can already see that that poor 3rd finger is going to have its work cut out for it to maintain. And from here, this is where harmonizing your own melodies can come into effect. You can take a very simple song like Ode to Joy I included on there, and add simple counterpoint with 2 voices. And then obviously from there you're free to add any bit of the chord or harmony that you would choose. maybe strum at it. So it's no longer just about playing tabs or playing notes or fingerstyle patterns of arpeggios. It becomes something that you can use for making your own arrangements. You can use this for creating your own preludes before pieces, warming up in any key. Anytime I have to play a piece in any key, I will do a couple preludes like this and figure out what key I'm in first of all. What's my vocabulary? What's my range? How high do I have to go? Because that's going to really impact what shapes I use, which is my next point of doing all this. For all of our classical backgrounds, the capo can sometimes be a tricky one. But if I'm using easy idiomatic shapes like the key of A minor, why would I want to bar to play in C minor when I can just put on the capo and play everything in A minor? It frees up our fingers and allows us to do quite a bit more. Which, to talk about that question from Thomas Mace, why would more strings be easier? Keep thinking about that. I want to come back to that in a bit. For those who don't know what a lead sheet is, this is the other reason this can be quite entertaining. By doing this, you can free yourself up to a substantial amount of repertoire. A lead sheet essentially is just the melody of any given tune or piece that have chords above it. This allows us to look at it almost like a continuo player. We have a melody. I picked a cheesy one from the Titanic. It's in the key of C. If you can't play one voice very well, we probably don't have a whole lot of business playing more than one voice at the same time. And this is something that I've noticed with guitarists and pianists alike. We're so eager to play polyphony. We want to play all the voices that we don't spend enough time making one of them very effective. And this is where the rhetorical nature of playing historic music is quite nice, because music before the 20th century was inherently rhetorical. We were trying to move someone in some way, whether that be in dance or whether that be in a way to move their affections, to change their literal dispositions, is what was believed in the Baroque era. So in this case, we have to play the way we speak, and I love playing songs that have text for this reason. You have to make your guitar actually sing it and actually speak it. And once you get to that point, then you say, I'm ready for two voice counterpoint. Oh, there's a C in the chord. I'm going to put a C in the bass. This next one's interesting, a slash chord. For those who don't know, the G is the chord you want. The second note after the slash implies what should be in the bass. So if I was playing only two voice counterpoint, my bass line would go C, D, C, C, G. Then you put the melody on top. Someone said, wouldn't a G/D be a second inversion G chord? Correct. That is exactly what it is. Because a G/B would have given us a very different bass line, wouldn't it? Do, ti, do instead of do, re, do. Now, obviously, it's a pretty sparse arrangement, so this is when we have to fill it in with more either arpeggios or chord tones. And deciding which octave to play. That's the other challenging part. Like in the situation of F, do we play the higher F on the D string or the lower F on the E string? Well, kind of depends. If you play this higher F right now, that's going to be a really close interval. G and F next to each other. It might sound a little dissonant. So in this situation, having a little bit more space in between is quite useful. And from there, it's your arrangement. You can add anything you would like. I know some fingerstyle players like the idea of percussion, and other people are very opposed to it. I like both in different contexts. I have to admit, I love the beautiful tone of an uninterrupted melodic player, but sometimes adding a little bit of splash of percussion is quite nice and quite fun. That's something that we could maybe cover at a different time, though. For the next little bit of the workshop, I want to focus on the simple approach to this. It's up to us to go and put through different keys and figure out how we can use this to our advantage. But going back to just the two voices on the outer E's, I want to show you how navigating from tonic to dominant can be a really useful tool for both improving and warming up. So in the key of E minor and E major, these are going to be parallel keys because they don't share the same notes. There are some half steps and whole steps that are different between the two. But the dominant stays the same. It's what's often called a perfect interval. And that's going to be the B. So we can walk up and find, oh yeah, E. Let's do E minor, so we only have one accidental on F sharp. We'll have E, F sharp, G, A, B. And then backwards, we would have E, D, C, B. Let's bring that simple tremolo back in. And all I want to do is repeat this descending tetrachord that goes from tonic to dominant. Two voices at a bass line. Change the subdivision. Not super musical yet, but so many things that we can add with such simple counterpoint. Pedaling on one pitch and allowing you the opportunity to figure out where are our whole steps and our half steps. I mentioned sequences earlier, and this is a great way to practice navigating whole steps and half steps on any string here. You'll notice that there are all sorts of different finger combinations we have to do. Sometimes it's a half step first, sometimes it's going to be two whole steps, which is quite a stretch. It starts opening the fretboard to us in a totally different way. And if you do this on every string, you could start on A's. You could start on D's. And follow the formula and find all these different keys that we can explore and ways to incorporate the mechanical with the musical. Feels odd speaking without getting too many responses. Some of my students out there might recognize some of these from my warm-ups, because this is exactly how I like to warm up before we dive into any of our pieces. We'll see what key we're playing in that day, and I'll say, okay, let's spend some time exploring this key. Where are your parameters? Crossing a string, going up and down a single string. How do we add different harmony? You can do the same thing with intervals. Like thirds. And then it's obviously fun to make your own arrangements. I have a lot of fun pulling up just a lead sheet and saying, I have a melody. Where am I going to start with? A melody and a chord progression. What else can I add to it? That's fine. What about some more voices? Bit of Hey Jude. And you can apply this to quite literally any style, any genre, if you have a melody and you have chords. And then you get to decide how many voices you want to add to that. And that's when the Giuliani would help, because he applies a lot more voices in there. But what I've noticed a lot of times with fingerstyle guitar on more of the pop folk side of things is it's missing melody a lot of the times. If you think of songs like Blackbird, it's beautiful, but it's all harmonic. There's no melody involved, you need a singer. Same thing with Stairway to Heaven. Yes, it's fingerstyle, but there's no melody involved unless you start adding it. See, I'm trying to condense as much as I can into such a short period. So I wanted to show you one other example. And this is another Disney tune that I quite enjoy from Dumbo, Baby Mine. If you take a look at the way they arranged this here, I love having both tabs and notes for a lot of reasons, but you can see the melody is clearly indicated with the notes pointing upwards. And you have the chords above. Then in the bass, it looks like they did some arpeggios. So if you were to reduce this into just two voices, you would leave the G in the bass with the third finger. And then you can start seeing what did they add to fill it out, fill out the texture. A mix of the harmony and the melodic. But if that melody isn't very convincing, if it doesn't convince you, it's probably not going to convince the listener. So I can't advocate enough just playing single line melodies and make it convincing, make it sound the way you would speak. That's absolutely imperative with this kind of playing. If you want to just play the chords behind someone else, then that has its place as well. If you want to think about some percussive elements, this is where it can be kind of entertaining as well. The whole guitar is a percussive instrument to begin with, but there's so many different sounds we can get, whether it's a thicker bass drum by hitting the body or a glop, hitting the saddle or the bridge can give you a totally different sound. Fingertips all over the place, and I would explore it on your instrument because every instrument's a little bit different, but the very basics would be to do something like a kick, snare, kick, snare. So the snare sound I'm getting by taking the side of my thumb and hitting the strings to get a nice click like a snare. To do something a little simpler with it, I'm putting a snare on beat 2. So I'm on an A minor chord right now. That would be a good place to start. Combining it all together, you get chords, you get melody, you get harmony, and you get melody. so on and so forth. It's a style of playing that allows you to be free of needing any accompaniment, needing another singer. So in a sense, it's very much like classical guitar. I remember I had spoken to some classical guitar players, and I think there was a time that it was more just fingerstyle patterns on chord progressions. But now it's also blended. I look at Giuliani exercises and soar pieces, and I see all the same fundamental techniques. The ability to bring your thumb up and your fingers down. But if we only practice the mechanical, we're not going to have that understanding that we can apply. So thinking about something like this famous romanza, it's in the key of E minor, following the same exact scales that we were playing earlier. There are two extra voices, open strings. We're adding in the fifth, the open B string, and the third, the open G string. But other than that, 5, 5, 4, 3, 3, 2, 1, 1, 3, 5, 1. Playing around on the scale. What comes next? Oh, the A chord. How's that related into the key of E? That would be our subdominant, the fourth scale degree. So what do you think comes next? Well, clearly the dominant, a B chord. And then you go right back to home. So it also fits into that paradigm of home, away from home, and back to home again. Now, I can't not talk about some of the harmonic approaches to playing. Essentially, you're breaking the guitar into two instruments. Your thumb's going to be a bass on the bass 3 strings, and your fingers more or less will stay on the top 3 strings if you're not doing the two voice melodic approach and it's more harmonic. So the thumb should feel confident bouncing and forth between different strings. And a good way to start doing the harmonic practicing would be maybe P and M and P and I. Simultaneously, I'm on a C chord, and then separate them. P, M, P, I, P, M, P, I. Then you can change chords. It's still in multiple voices, and historically this would have been called the stile brise, or the broken style, because you're still hearing just chords, but broken chords. The best part, for me at least, is feeling like I understand this instrument in a way where you can add chords. And I think we probably have about 10 minutes left. So if anyone has something that maybe I can go back and refresh on and spend some more time, because I know I went rather quickly, but I didn't want to spend too much time on the rudimentary things, though they are important.
I have an idea, Braden. I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about the Titanic theme, My Heart Will Go On, deciding, looking at the lead sheet and looking at the melody, there's so many decisions to make about exactly what to do. Would you mind walking us through a little slower about how you choose how you chose what you chose? Because I think it's such a if you know the options, it's like, oh, I'll just do that. But maybe for a few people, it'd be interesting to see, yeah, kind of like step by step. How did you do that?
Sure. Let me pull that back up real quick. So, back to, got to be able to play the melody first. It's got to be convincing. It's got to sound natural. But then after that, what's the next step I would add? I would add just the second voice. I'd play the bass line. Okay, that's fine. It gets the job done. It implies enough harmony that we get some context. What could we do next? Well, thinking about some of that mechanical work that we did, we could add different subdivisions to the bass line. What if we did half notes in the bass instead of just a whole note? Gives it more direction, more momentum, fills it out a little bit more in the texture. What could we add next? Well, more of the chord tones. We still want the melody on top, but I see it's a C chord, so why not play a full C chord on the beginning? And in this case, we have a G/D, so it would be like a G chord, but since D's in the bass, you don't really even need the left hand. Ah, that was interesting. So there's a rest here. What can we do? Well, we can connect things together, whether that be the melody, but if we are trying to recreate the melody in a convincing way, we might not want to add something that's maybe we do. Maybe we do, and we add that top ornament on there, but we can also do it in the bass line. We can say, what's between C and G? Oh yeah, C, B, A, G. So I walked it back up to C. And we have a long time here on this F chord, a whole measure of rest in the melody. So that's when we have to do an arpeggio of some sort, or I guess we could sit there and keep playing a bass line if we're keeping it in two voices. It'll be very sparse though. How do we fill out the texture? We can add arpeggios. Ornaments, percussion. The guitar becomes an orchestra.
Carmen made an interesting point. She says Carmen's a good singer as well, and she might just want to sing the melody. If you were to sing or someone else was to sing and you still wanted to continue playing fingerstyle, what type of thing would you do to accompany rather than trying to play everything?
Yes, okay. So that's when the Giuliani exercises will come in handy a lot. Because you don't have to worry about the melody. In that case, you're playing chords. And there's all sorts of different arpeggio patterns that you can add in there. Either P-I-M-A-M-I, or, I mean, the combinations are endless, but the goal would be to sing it and just add the harmonic accompaniment. This is more what a continuo player would be doing.
Great. Well, if you'd like, Braden, I think we might have a lot of questions here. So do you want to switch over to the Q&A?
Sure, please. Yes.
Okay, sure. I'll kick us off with Stanislav, I think is his name, sent me a private message, which is a rather long question, but in summary, he asks, he's been developing a technique which is playing without nails and is mostly usually utilizing rest strokes. So he's utilizing a lot of rest strokes and it's been working for him. But now that he's playing arpeggios and chords, obviously rest strokes fall short. You can't rest stroke everything because you can't rest stroke adjacent strings and play chords. So, but he kind of ran into a wall with his approach because he finds that with free strokes, let's see his exact comment. He wants you to elaborate on the mechanics of a free stroke. Like, how do you change your hand position from rest stroke to free stroke? Where's the contact point on the finger, and how are you supposed to move the finger to make a successful free stroke, essentially?
That's a really good question. I think the lute taught me this because the lute has the double courses, and having those double courses require you to actually touch both strings simultaneously before you pluck it. So it's not a rest stroke per se, but you do have to dig into the strings a little bit more and use more of the flesh of your hand, which will make it a little bit slower. Nails are very articulate and you can be right on the tip, you can play very quickly, but when you're playing with a flesh sound, you have to really dig your flesh into it. So when I'm playing all of my bass lines, I'm putting the string pretty far into the pad of my thumb. And it's the same thing with all of the index fingers. And I would say practice it both ways. Because on the lute, And Brandon could probably attest the same way. I never use rest stroke on my fingers, ever. But I always rest stroke the bass. But then on the guitar, I feel like it's a flipped technique because I will rest stroke plenty on the fingers, but hardly ever with the thumb, unless it's an arpeggio that requires 2 thumbs in a row. Yeah,
Good.
really good question. A lot
Oh,
of
we,
pad.
Good, actually, and then segueing right from there, I had another question sent to me privately. Somebody's very curious about the idea of playing without nails. In our last class, we touched on this a bit last month in your master class. But for those who weren't there, can you speak briefly about the idea of playing without nails and how that approach might differ from playing with nails?
Sure. So I was a self-taught guitar player for many years when I was younger. No fingernails. I went into college and I studied classical guitar and I had to grow the nails out. And there were some things that I learned really quickly. I liked to play with nails because I could play fast and I could play really loud, which was important if I had to be in a recital hall and I needed to project to the back of the hall. But personally speaking, I just never liked the tone of it. It was too abrasive, it was very loud and kind of scratchy. I've always preferred the flesh tone because that's how I started. I feel like when you use the flesh, you can draw out more of the natural resonance of the instrument because you're listening to it rather than trying to project. And it makes sense with the way that the guitar evolved. If you think about Segovia and some of those masters that started, they were trying to compete against pianists and violinists in recitals and concert halls. They needed to project, they needed to be heard at the back, but now I have this. I don't need to do that so much. I can make a beautiful sound that I like being 2 feet away, just like it sounds good enough being 30 feet away with amplification.
And so, how does the contact differ? Where do you contact the string on the flesh to play? And is the stroke the same, or do you think of it as being different?
I do think of it as being different. When I played a lot with nails, I felt like I would use flesh contact, but I could be on the very tip, just enough that I could have a little bit of flesh contact and then roll off the nail. When it comes to playing with the fingers, I have to be a lot more into the string. My fingers go fairly deep in. I don't know how well you can see it, but if I made marks on my fingers, you can see it's fairly far in. You wouldn't do that so much with fingernails.
Right. Paul asks, does this mean that we have to press slightly down on the string at the start of the pluck before the transverse action that does the plucking?
Correct. That's one of the biggest differences too, is you're not plucking directly towards your face. You have to actually push into the instrument a little bit in order to get that to sound well, especially with double courses.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's the big goal, right? No matter what instrument you play, it seems to be, I mean, in terms of plucking instrument, lute, guitar, whatever, the idea seems to be that we want to push the string towards the soundboard, towards the top, or towards your belly, you can think. Push the string towards your belly and let go of it, and you want the string to vibrate in towards the instrument, as opposed to the opposite, which is pulling it away from your belly, which makes the string snap. Or if you see your fingers pluck like this, where your knuckles go upward like this is a no-no. This is actually extension. You're actually extending your hands to pluck up. And this is a very common thing, to go back to Stanislav's point, question about kind of the free strokes. One of the big issues is that if we set up our hand incorrectly, doing a free stroke is sort of impossible without hitting the next string. So what people do is, oh, I'm going to run to the next string. I don't want to hit it. So they go like this. This is very bad technique. You do this 1,000 times, which is how many times you do this to play, a fast piece. And you can easily develop all sorts of injuries, not arthritis, tendonitis and carpal tunnel syndrome, you name it. So you have to be very careful. And instead, I think Sword talks about the idea of closing the hand one finger at a time. That's a pluck. So this is called flexion, and this is extension. And you want flexion to pluck. So plucking should look like this. I also have no nails at the moment. So you touch the string, push it down towards your belly, and then you close your hand one finger at a time, not this. And that'll be kind of the basic technique. This is the same with nails, by the way. If I use my little bit of nail, The only difference is I start on the nail, we call it in the pocket, and then I go in towards my palm like I'm closing my hand. Almost as if I'm gonna actually touch the tips of my fingers to my palm, kind of like clapping with one hand. This is what I think of as a pluck. Do you agree with that, Braden? Is that your philosophy too?
Yes, yes, of course. It's much more natural to close your hands. If you think about what you do throughout your daily life, it's not so often that you bend your fingers backwards unless you're like an evil genius. But for the most part, our fingers do want to curl, so we need to make something that is inherently unnatural. Playing an instrument is not natural, no one's born able to do it. And we need to incorporate as much natural behavior as we can.
Yeah. Good. Okay, I think I saw that Aaron had a question. Aaron, do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah, sure. How you doing?
Hey.
Um, Thank you, Braden, for this. Has been interesting. When I have a chart in front of me like that, I often have a real hard time figuring out what to do in the bass. Especially like if you're talking about finger picking, you could do thirds, you could do fifths, but really it's when I switch, I'm never sure what to do. So I'm doing thirds, but then if I go to a G, should I be doing thirds then again or doing, fifths? Like I get lost. Like, I don't know which pattern to do in the bass. Like, what do you think about when you put that together?
Oh, very good questions. Well, it depends on your approach. I actually really like doing ones and fives because obviously tonic and dominant. So I'm going back and forth between ones and fives. You can do it in just about any key. And it will be more consistent because you're always going back and forth between 1 and 5. Having the third, yeah, it does sound a little bit like country, doesn't it? Fine, add 2 articulations of the fingers and make it a waltz. Yes, yes. What to do with the bass line? I think sometimes when we get into that groove of just bouncing back and forth, it becomes more of that mechanical harmonic approach rather than maybe thinking about it in terms of different voices. How does the voice actually work? And I like thinking about it in terms of voices and in terms of counterpoint because I am also a singer and I like to sing. And I think about if I was to rearrange this for people to actually sing it or for people to maybe play it on different instruments and to orchestrate it, what would it sound like? Do I want a bass that's just going either between the 1 and the 3 or the 1 and the 5? Maybe, but I'm sure that bass singer might not sing it super in tune and it bounce around a lot. So I think it does depend on the texture and style and what you're trying to get from the arrangement.
What about using, if you're thinking about the bass, what type of situation would push you towards maybe changing the tuning, like going to drop D or something? How, in what case might you do that to help out the bass line?
Great question. I saw that William was learning the Bach Cello Suite number 1 prelude. Why would I drop the D on that? Because if you play it in the key of D, now you can add octaves. So it becomes idiomatic. I don't have to fret the bass, which brings me around to my point I made earlier. Why would more strings be easier in this style? Well, I don't have to finger the basses. The basses are already there. I just play them with the left hand or the right hand thumb. There's no reason to actually fret them. Which frees up my left hand to really focus on melody and harmony. Let the thumb do all the work in the bass.
Great. Daniel, I see your question in the chat. Do you wanna ask your question out loud, or do you always prefer people to say hi and
Yeah, sure, I can.
Thank
I can
you.
try. Thing is that I'm now learning the classical guitar, and I'm just trying to learn the lute. And then I've come to there's kind of this thing that in classical guitar, people say that I should usually play with nails, and then of course I've now seen many things on the internet that I can also play without nails. But with nails, it seems to be easier to get some faster playing for like tremolo or something. And my question is that like since you seem to play lute too, so that like how do I or like can I easily play both of them at the same time, and like how do you handle the technique, or do you play the lute with nails, or do you have like a slight different like bend on the finger, something that you can play the like double strings on the lute easier even if you have nails?
I think that you have to decide what you're focusing on at the moment. Obviously, we can do both. If you're going to be playing a piece with tremolo on the classical guitar, you should probably grow your nails out. But if you're playing a lot of lute, you should play with as much flesh as you can. And it is something we have to navigate. Brandon and I have both gone back and forth from nails to no nails to small nails to long nails. It just depends on what you are really investing in. I do think that it's something that has some deep rooted cultural differences as well between maybe the lute and the guitar, but that's starting to not be as strongly divided because it should be about how it sounds, and we should always follow our ear and make beautiful music.
Well said. I have my own thoughts on that as well. It's a big topic, but having navigated those same waters, Daniel, of really not wanting to give up my nails, and while playing lutes. So it's a pretty recent thing for me to play without nails, and I'm sure I'll go back to nails for certain things. And so my solution is simply this: what am I working on at the moment? Am I going to play a class? Am I going to do a big classical guitar recording? Of tremolo pieces. Well, the good news is these grow out, and in 2 weeks I can have nails again. You don't. I think one of the big misconceptions is that nails look like Nosferatu claws. To play with nails means you have just enough hard surface peeking above the fingertip that when you put your fingers to the strings, you can find them. Right now, I technically don't have any nails. I'm playing without nails, but my nails grow almost to the end of my fingers. So if I want to, I can find the nail and use them. And Sword talks about this. Sword play without nails, and he talks about finding the nail to make a specific color. So here's me playing without nails, and now here's me finding the nail. So I can find it for a brassy effect, and then I can go right back. So you can actually go back and forth. And if I just let these grow out a millimeter more, which is maybe for me like I don't know, a week of growth or something. Now I have real nails, and for me, playing with nails always means touching the flesh and the nail, and never just the nail. The other things to consider, I'll just throw out there. Tarrega, who wrote Recuerdos de la Alhambra, the most famous classic tremolo piece, didn't have nails at the end of his life, and developed a whole school which he taught his pupils around playing without nails. He considered it superior, and he's like, the Chopin of the guitar, and he's talking about playing without nails being superior for a variety of reasons. And he's the one who wrote this piece. So one idea is that tremolo is not necessarily what it's become to be now with nails, which is this kind of like machine gun fast thing. It's more of like this brushy, airy. So this is me trying tremolo without nails. It's true that it's harder, but that's better. I think it took me a second. It's possible, but I think at that speed, what we end up finding is that the top part is more brushy and it's more ethereal and less it's less of that machine gun approach. So there's that fact to consider, and then about the lute, it depends what repertoire you're playing. If you're playing Renaissance repertoire, we have people who talk about at the time to talk about the flesh being more sounding better, but they're referring it to it in the books, which means that some people were probably playing with because they're counteracting what maybe other people did. Renaissance is one thing. Baroque is a different story. Baroque lute, Baroque repertoire, we know people play with nails. Weiss talks about people playing arch lute and Baroque guitar and things like that with nails. Piccinini talks about it. So basically, the short version is that throughout history, you have organic picks right here that just if you're just lazy for a few days, suddenly you're playing with nail. And playing with nail is a spectrum, really. It's not with or without. You can do with a little, you can do with and then without in the same piece if you really wanted. And so in the end, I think it's certainly possible to do both. Okay, end of rant. Back to all your questions. Thank you, Daniel. I see, let's see. James says, do you change some of these styles if you're playing an 8 or 10 string guitar? How do you handle that, Braden?
Good. So I also see someone asked again, why would more strings be easier? Well, because you don't have to finger the basses. So thinking about the guitar here, like Bach's famous Bourrée, I'm in drop D. But you have to play the bass line with both hands. But if you did that on the Baroque lute, the entire bass line's taken over pretty much with your thumb on your right hand. So you don't have to finger both the bass and the treble. You can only finger one or the other and leave the bass to the thumb. So does the style change? Not necessarily, but the approach changes. You have big open bass strings, so it's more like how we started the exercises in A minor because we have open strings, rather than having to hold down a bass note like we did in C major. I just lost a finger playing the bass line.
Very cool. Another good question about no nail playing. This is very relevant, and I think a really good one. Does the tension of the strings have anything to do with whether or not you should play, basically playing with or without nails? So do you advise a certain tension if you're going to play without nails?
Yes, without nails, low tension, please. Low tension. It sounds better. You don't have to work as hard. The fingernails can provide a wallop, and the guitars that are overbuilt and have high tension strings can really flourish with that. It can resonate, it can make it to the back of a concert hall if you really beat it up. But on a low tension string, it's really about chasing the tone. It's listening to what you can get from your ears and from your fingertips, and it's all about touch rather than sitting down and just playing loud and fast.
And as much as we're saying, by the way, Braden and I both happen to be playing without nails right now, and we both have a lot of nice things to say about that, because I think it's kind of the underdog of the classical guitar repertoire, right? Like today, if you talk to most classical guitarists, professionals, you go to university for it, the dominating view is that classical guitar is played with nails. And so it's not that we are saying this is not a good idea. It's just a different perspective. You can do things with nails you can't do without. And there are things to love about playing with nails that I miss when I play without. But in the other camp, it's totally true. There's things you can gain with playing without nails that you definitely can't get with nails. So which one's better? It's chocolate and vanilla, as far as I'm concerned. So we're not saying neither of these are good or bad. It's taste. And this is something to explore if you have it. Next time you break a nail, maybe instead of just saying, okay, I'll have a handicap for a week, maybe even it out and just try to explore some no nail technique for a bit. It's for me, it's been revelatory to learn how to play without, and then when they grow back in, I discover new things each time. So it's a really fascinating subject. I see some hands appearing in now from our attendees. So let's get to some direct comments. I saw Dennis had his hand up for a while. Hey Dennis, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. When working with bass and the treble strings, a few years ago I found this technique whereby playing some songs you can play with Travis picking. But some songs don't work quite that well. And I found that, well, if I just play the melody and then just play random strings on chord tones, it seems to work pretty well. Just kind of doing, I was wondering, I didn't do that very well, sorry, but is that kind of a legitimate method? It's really not very structured, and I'm just really hitting random chord tones with my thumb and other fingers, and it seems to come out pretty well. I don't know if it may sound too messy though, or should I get more disciplined in working getting the right chord tones with them? Give me a critique on that technique.
Yeah, so I don't think there's per se a right or wrong, but there is something to be said about the inversion that you use, because that will affect how the counterpoint works. For instance, if you have a chord and you put the fifth in the bass, it's going to be a little bit more unstable and a little weaker than if you have the root or the third. So I think it depends on what you're trying to gain from it. A good example is something as simple with the Travis picking as Fleetwood Mac Landslide. But the bass line should be dee da da dum. If I didn't put that in inversion, I could play the same thing But then I just changed the bass line, D bomb, B bomb, instead of the descending and ascending bass line. So I do think having some kind of structure to it and discipline is really beneficial.
Okay.
Just to piggyback on that, I think the approach certainly is pragmatic and does the job. If you're just looking for a plug and play thing and you need accompaniment, it totally works. So you just put the shape down and everything is now fair game. So it works. It's just as you do that, I think you can then maybe if you want to go to the next level, like Braden is saying, if you're thinking, okay, what am I actually doing though? Which note do I want? Is this the root or the fifth? That would be the next levels to kind of be more aware of what you're playing. But for sure, I mean, clearly, as you just demonstrated, it works. It produces a lot of sound, and it's very full. It's like a instant arrangement of a piece. But then from there, if you wanted, then you could get more calculated with it.
Yes, I've actually done that a little bit, a couple of times to try to work on getting a little more interesting bass line than just random bass notes.
Very
so
cool.
Thanks
for the question.
I see we have another raised hand. I do recognize your face with the cat in the background, but I can't remember your name. I'm sorry. Your username says iPhone.
Yeah. I'm Steve.
Oh, we're a little frozen here. Can you say that again?
Can you hear me all right? I'm Steve. Can you hear me?
There we go. Hey, Steve. Now your audio is coming through.
Hey,
Let's see if it stays.
Yeah, good. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Brandon Braden, for doing this. I just had a question about playing, because I play with a classical guitar with a combination of nail and flesh mainly. I don't have really long fingernails, but I was wondering to have like a kind of a clear, crisp, louder sound, like if you need to play live or whatever. Do you guys find that you need to like change your strings more often? Having like a fresh set of strings, or does older strings, or does that really matter? Or do you guys have an opinion on that?
Braden?
Well, my opinion is yes, but it also depends. How much are you playing? How long has it been since you restrung? How soon are you planning on restringing before you play? Like, I wouldn't want to restring my guitar the day before a concert. I like it to settle for a week or so.
Right.
Yeah, if you're trying to go for loudness, well, that's why the high tension strings exist. If you really want that loud punch that you can dig in and wallop on, that's what I would do as well. I'd put on some thicker strings, some higher gauges, and let it sit for a week or two before I bashed into it.
Right. So you're saying basically probably keeping fresher strings on it more often. I also know that Brandon's talked about using lower tension strings too while playing. So I don't know what Brandon's opinion is on it.
I think it just depends on, are you trying to get to the back of a concert hall without amplification, or do you have amplification? Because there's going to be a huge difference there.
That's good, yeah. Because I end up doing both.
My take is actually I've become a bit of a skeptic on this subject. Actually, I've been thinking about doing an elaborate video about low tension strings, because this is a commonly said thing, like high tension gives you more volume. And I think I'm starting to wonder if it's perceived volume. Like when you're playing with high tension, it does with less force, because you have a more solid taut string, you get more sound. But I feel that if you're using this technique correctly and you're really digging into the strings, you have to more manually push low tension strings. But I feel like I'm making a lot of sound with low tension strings, and I'm actually wondering. So I'm thinking about doing a video with like a decibel meter or something, and like at the back of a hall. Is it louder, or is it perceived volume? I don't know. But it is a commonly said thing, and I've been saying this for a long time, but I'm starting to wonder about that. So, but just to answer your question, Steve, if I kind of got two different questions there. One is about like how often should you change your strings, and for me the answer there is if they start to sound bad. So we have 3 metal wound strings and 3 nylon or some type of synthetic material, or it could be gut strings, so trebles and basses. The wound strings need to be changed much more often. I go through, I don't know, 7, 8 sets of basses before I change my treble strings. In fact, I'll leave my treble strings on for 2 years if they don't go false. So that's the test is you play the 12th fret harmonic, and then you play the 12th fret pitch. And the pitch should be exactly the same. If you hear something like this, when you play, that means it sounds sharp. Then your string is false. You need a new string. But you do have to be careful because you can like in vibrato, you can bend the pitch. So if you pull in the wrong direction, you have to be careful that you're not pushing or pulling kind of straight down, and the pitch should be the same. So sometimes you'll find that you have a false string. And no matter how much you tune, when you fret, it'll be out of tune. So if that's happening, change your strings. And then if your basses sound very dead, like they're kind of getting rusty colored, or they don't look like nice silver kind of a shine, then first of all, the thing you do is you can wipe down the strings with a cloth. And I take them all the way down so they're very loose, not off the instrument, and I wipe them down with a cloth, and then I bring them back up, and often they'll have a second life. So suddenly they sound new again. You'll hear a lot more upper partials, a lot more brightness out of them. And that's kind of what you get with new basses. You get suddenly bright sounding strings. And if you have all metal strings, like Braden right now is playing a steel string guitar, right? He has plain steel for the trebles. And for that, when the strings get kind of black, all of your skin oils sit on there for a long time. They'll get black, they'll get rusty. The guitar loses its shimmer. And when that happens, it doesn't sound it sounds a bit dull. So the first thing you could do to prevent that from happening is wipe down your strings when you're done playing if you have sweaty hands, or just in general, or take the strings down, wipe them down, bring them back up for a second life. And then if your strings are just dull, no matter what, they sound like they're at the end of their rope, that's when I change my strings. But it's kind of, it depends on your tolerance. Maybe you're okay with dull sounding strings. It's a kind of a subjective thing at the end of the day, I think. Good. Okay, let me do a little look around here to see, does anyone have their hand up or anything? Any additional questions? Sally?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Hey.
Okay. I think a lot depends on the environment and the salinity in the air. I live on an island out in the Pacific Ocean, and I don't even take my guitar outside, but just being in the house, because our house is heated and cooled by a heat pump, it draws air from the outside. Well, the air on the outside, if you were to look at my backyard, which I'm looking at out the window, probably within 150 yards is Harney Channel, the Pacific Ocean that goes out straight to Japan. So a lot of times my wound cords get sort of reddish and then start getting dark after that. And the nylon strings definitely decay in sort of a salty air. So I actually change my strings quite often. Now, what I have done the last 3 weeks is that because Marcus and I, he's trying to help me with bar chords. He did have me order a set of low tension strings to help me acquire, sequentially that kind of, well, to just build up to doing it comfortably without feeling like every time I try a bar chord, I'm an absolute failure. And so he had me put low tension strings on it. And I don't think they sound any slower or softer than the high tension strings I was playing with. I'm playing on a Cervantes Hauser, Herman Hauser. It's a sort of a replica of his 1928, I think, or 1923. And cool. But I don't think that the sound is any less loud in volume or any less crisp because I'm playing with low tension strings.
I wanted to add to that and what Brandon had mentioned earlier. I don't necessarily think that it is a decibel difference per se, but the touch is so different. And Totally. If you do play with the same amount of touch that you do with the high tension strings, I feel like the low tension kind of spatters or splats, almost like when you pluck upwards on the guitar. So I've heard people playing with low tension strings with the same touch that they would on high tension strings, which ends up killing the resonance. But if you're following the resonance, I do think it's just as loud.
Yeah, really, really good point. I never thought of it that way, Braden, but that's exactly it. You just have to change your touch, and like anything, you have to get used to it and learn the mannerisms of the string and the kind of what it wants. That's the same thing that people often do when they to justify why they think nails are necessary for classical guitar. It's because people who have nails suddenly don't for various reasons. Maybe they go to try it. They use their exact same technique they've been using for a decade or so, and they can even be a professional guitarist. It doesn't work. It sounds small. It sounds bad. It doesn't have any resonance. And they say, no nail playing is no good. I can't, guitar needs nails. Well, honestly, it takes months. It took me, I don't know, like 3-4 months before I played a single note that I was happy with. And still, I feel like I'm just still discovering how to play with no nails. And so it's just a different technique. And I think you're right that playing with different touch of strings is just, you need to adapt, you know?
The first 2 weeks that I had the low tension strings on the guitar, Marcus was just insistent that I not work on any of my pieces. He wanted me to do drills to get accustomed to the feel of the low tension strings and to learn how to play them with the tip of my finger and with the space, the pocket of the little itty bitty fingernails that I managed to grow because I have bad nails. But he wanted me to focus on getting used to playing the low tension strings because I was so accustomed to the very, very crisp sound and the crisp feel of the high tension.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Well, thank you for your question, Sally. I see we're about to run out of time. I see Mark has his hand up. I'd like to get to one more question. Mark, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. So I've never heard of low tension strings. Does that mean lighter gauge?
Yeah, it's a lighter gauge, which means that the string is less taut. It has more give to it. I have just about the lowest tension strings you could possibly put on an instrument right now. My G string is about the thickness of a B string. Actually, this is a B string, and it's super pliable. So it's so pliable that I can just move it. So if this was high tension, I would be able to maybe with the same amount of force only move it this much, which means things like hammer-ons, super easy. For you can trill forever. Or vibrato, you have so much control over the string. It's a thinner gauge, which means the string is more pliable.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. Braden, we should wrap up. Do you have any closing thoughts, or just want to say bye?
Thanks everyone for coming and listening to my Fingerstyle 101 in 2 voices. I really wanted to take this approach mostly because there is plenty of material out there for arpeggios and for Travis picking and all the other styles. But thinking this way becomes a lot more musical in a sense, because you're thinking in terms of voices and the way you're actually going to play it as if you were going to sing it. And I do think that's a very invaluable part of playing the guitar effectively.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for this, Braden. I think that there's so much packed into this. Braden covered quite a lot today, and I see, watching the cameras, I see some people following along, and I see some people who were a little stuck on some things. You have the handout, and we're going to send out this recording so you can go back through and watch things. I strongly encourage you to review the material. What Braden covered today, really, like, he put in a nutshell material that you could expand on for years. So I would really encourage you all to take each part of what he showed seriously and unpack that. And there's so much music to be made given what he's covered. So Braden, thank you for that. Remember that he is available, as well as our other teachers, for weekly lessons at Arpeggiato. And you can check out his profile there. Our next live event, we do these monthly. So our next live event is going to be a masterclass on November 5th. It's another Saturday, the first Saturday of November. And I'm going to be teaching that masterclass myself. So we're going to need 2 volunteers to perform. So let us know if you'd like to perform in that class. We strongly encourage Arpeggiato students to perform. So please do sign up for the event. It should be live already, actually, to be seen. And I just give one more round of applause to Braden here. I completely sympathize. By the way, there's something funny about this environment of like speaking into the void of Zoom and like not hearing a response is kind of a funny thing. So that's what we get for being virtual. But of course, the pros outweigh the cons. The fact that we're all spread out across the world makes this so cool. So thank you all for spending your time with us. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Braden, and have a good month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.